thought it was good.
You ready?
Did not. So we're going to.
5:35. Fact TV tells me they're ready. I'm going to call the SU board to order, and I think we have quorum on the local board. So why don't the chairs call their or chairs or vice chairs or clerks call their local boards to order, and then we'll get some direction from Superintendent Pratt as to how to proceed.
Right. We should also, by the way, Mr. Chairman, have those who are SU board members identify themselves as such, just so that we know if there's an SU board vote that has to be taken.
Quorum, yeah? Yeah, we do.
If the chairs or clerks will call their board to order, and then let's just go around the table and introduce ourselves for the benefit of people who might actually take the time to watch this on TV.
Okay, I call to order the Grafton School Board meeting.
Rick, you want to call your board?
I'll call the Rockingham School Board to session.
Deb?
I'd like to call the Bells Falls Union High School Board to order.
I call the Athens School Board to order.
Do we have an officer from?
Westminster?
Elise Manning, and I call the Westminster School Board to order.
Okay, Elise, since you've called your board to order, why don't you tell us who you are and we'll just go down the table.
I'm Elise Manning.
I'm Cheryl Charles, member of the Westminster School Board and the Supervisory Union Board.
Tim Young, Westminster Board.
Brenda Farkas, Bellows Falls Board.
Carolyn Partridge, State Representative for the Wyndham 3 District.
Stephen Major, Bells Falls Union High School Board, representing Westminster.
Matt Treber, State Representative for Wyndham 3.
Kristen Swartout, Rockingham Board and Supervisory Union member.
Margot Gia on the Rockingham School Board and the Union District.
Rick Holloway, Rockingham School Board and WNESU Board.
Whoops, you're okay.
Lynn Carey, Assistant Superintendent.
Chris Pratt, Superintendent.
David Clark, I represent Westminster on the Union High School Board and I chair the SU Board.
Andrew Haas, Director of Student Support Services.
Josh Aberman, Board Recorder.
Ed Bank, Grafton School Board, Supervisory Union School Board, Chair of the Grafton School Board, Chair of the Athens Grafton School Board.
I'm Jessa West Clark, at Grafton Board, I guess the Athens Grafton Board, and the SU Board.
Jack Breyer. I'm from Grafton and I'm on the SU Board, the Grafton Athens Board, the Bellows Falls Union High School Board, and the Grafton Board. I clearly have no time.
Deb Wright, SU Board and Vice Chair of the High School Board.
Harold Noyes, Chair of the Athens Board.
That's the one I use.
Of the Grafton Athens
That's what I used.
Graf Board and High School Board.
Lynn Morgan on the Athens Board and the Athgraph Board and the SU.
Charles Chase, I'm on the Athens Board, the Athgraph Board, and the SU Board.
Molly Mannix, High School Board, SU Board from Westminster.
Okay, Superintendent Pratt, what are we going to do?
I would suggest that, seeing we have our business manager here and our director of student services here to give a presentation, that we start on that end of it before getting into the bigger discussions that we have as a joint.
Any objections? Andy, why don't you tell us all about it?
Thank you. So, Mr. Pratt had asked me to be here just to talk about, the first 6 months, what's been going on, my impressions, things we've been doing, and kind of areas where we're going. So, just to kind of start, Thanks, I didn't need that. Just to kind of start, currently we're serving 322 students in the entire SU, which is about 27% of the population for all of our students. And you can see there's a breakdown here of where students are placed and in what buildings. We currently have, as you know, in different buildings in the high school here, there's two specialized programs. One is TIDES, which is more for our emotionally disturbed students, and also our intensive needs or our life skills program for our intellectually delayed students. At the middle school, we follow a similar model with those two programs. At Central, there is an intensive needs or life skills program, and then at Westminster, we serve the TIDES program there. So we split that off from the two buildings.
A definition of the TIDES program.
Yep, thanks. I want to be able to give you the exact, we just went over this today. TIDES is Teaching Independent Development Education Systems, I believe. But essentially, it's an acronym just for identifying that program that's working with those students who are behaviorally challenged for the most part. So one of the things, Sky Payne, our school psychologist, had provided me when I came in, a snapshot of the district and looking at the frequency of the primary disabilities that we have in our district. And along with that, Tim Shuffleberg, who is our early childhood special education program coordinator, provided me with a breakdown of what he's been seeing coming through his program with the early childhood. Right now, we have 25% of our students are identified as developmentally delayed, and developmentally delayed, or DD, is a large catchment area for our students up to year 8, and it includes students who have Asperger's or autism spectrum disorder, intellectually delayed, and emotionally disturbed. And so that's a kind of a catchment up until age 8, and then after that they start branching out into those different areas. And you can see that the national average that's trending is at 7%. So we are well above what we're catching as far as students in that area. The other part is that the early childhood special education is estimating that at the end of this year, they'll have about 50 students identified needing services, and by next year, they'll have 55 students identified, and that's up about 10. Last year, they finished at about 46 students who are identified. So we are identifying more students at an early age than we are. Did you have a question, sir?
Do you want questions now or at the end of your presentation?
However you guys want to proceed, I can try and answer questions now. And
on this specific slide, it seems absolutely stunning difference: 7% nationally, 25% locally. It's not real. It would be truly bizarre statistically and medically for that to be real if nationally we were identifying students the same way as we are locally. So either nationally we're not identifying students so well, and we're doing a better job locally, or we are excessively identifying locally. I mean, unless we assume that there's some dramatic environmental problem in this area,
Or
which would,
socioeconomic.
or yeah, but
I mean, that's the easiest identifier right
yes,
there to make
but
the
but
statistics valid.
but it couldn't be that big. It couldn't be nearly 4 times.
It could be.
Because, yeah, I mean, so, your thoughts on what you did?
yeah, so I think that the national averages are they're a few years behind because there aren't norms right now for that national average. So I think that there is a piece of that there needs to be a new norm coming out. When Sky looked at her piece of it, the earliest she could find was a couple years old. So that is a piece. Wyndham County has the highest rate of students with autism spectrum disorder than any county in Vermont. I do believe that the socioeconomic piece has a large piece of what is happening in that, that students are not potentially getting the proper parenting and the proper environment growing up at that young age, because early childhood is catching kids at 3.
You say autism is autism spectrum, which of course is a spectrum.
It's a large piece, yes.
Is influenced by economic status. Autism is influenced by economic status.
No, what I'm saying is that those are 2 factors that are potentially why our numbers are higher for developmentally delayed, because you can't identify a student at age 3 as autism spectrum disorder, so they get into that catchment area of developmentally delayed. And so developmentally delayed includes emotionally disturbed, intellectually disabled, and autism spectrum disorder. So those 3, once they get in at age 8, they split out, and we can identify academically more where they are. So it's also other health impaired can fit in there. So it's a large catchment area up to age 8. And that's why that's so large, is that when you look at it, in Wyndham Northeast, we have a large amount of students who can potentially be identified for needs at a very young age. That's how I read that. It doesn't necessarily mean that every student has autism spectrum disorder.
Every student in that population.
In that population, correct.
But it could also, but all of those are types of developmental delays that, if you look for them more carefully, you find more.
Correct. So we are looking back, and we're asking the question: are we over-identifying? Are we doing that piece, or are we doing a better job of identifying? Which means we're catching students at a younger age, which means we're doing interventions at a younger age, which may potentially reduce the amount of needs as they get older. So that's what we're kind of trying to look at right now.
Can you take a question from our Westminster colleague, Cheryl Charles?
Just following up on Stephen's question, you did state that Wyndham County has the highest rate of autism than any other, higher rate than any other county. Is that starting at age 8 when you do have them broken out into an autism spectrum group? I'm asking the basis of that statistic.
That's just, I couldn't put my finger on an actual statement or a statistic of that. That is what I've heard from the other directors and I heard from HCRS, Department of Mental Health, that we work with, that is what they are seeing. So I haven't seen that actual number, but that's what's been stated to me numerous times in meetings. So
I think for the record, we ought to have that number verified.
I will definitely find that number.
Please.
Yes.
And I think it's important to also remember that we're in an area of Vermont where we get a lot of people who move to Wyndham County for the services that Vermont provides at that early age that other states don't do as well of a job as identifying the kids at an early age. Remember, we started a couple of years ago looking at even 4-year-olds. So we are in that area. We have Massachusetts, we have New Hampshire, that people move to the Wyndham County area to get the services that they may not be getting in other states or parts of Vermont.
I think it's important when we say these statistics to have them verified and true, because a statement like that would imply that the population of school-age kids and young parents in Wyndham County is increasing. If you're saying that people are that our numbers are higher than others because of an incoming population, then you should, on the census, see an incoming population, which we don't see.
But we also have a high transient population as well in Wyndham County. So they kind of.
But then they would be moving out too, and we wouldn't see a bump in our total numbers. I mean, it's transient in and out.
But we're seeing the in and the out, which is keeping it level at that point. See what I'm saying? We have people moving to the area, but we also have people moving out. So it's doing this. There's really not enough to change the overall percentages that we're seeing, and that's what.
But it wouldn't justify your rationale just a moment ago.
I don't want to get into arguing right now.
Just numbers. Just want it really clear.
I understand that, but so what he's
I'll
saying is based
clarify
on
that statement. But this is based on the statistics that were provided to me by Sky Payne, that the work she's been doing with our students, and by Tim Shuffleberg, that he's been seen in his years of working in the early childhood.
Stephen, I think that Josh, who's the recorder, has your question, and I believe administration will be looking forward to giving you that answer. This is a good one.
So what we've seen there, though, is that 44% of the students we serve are falling into that catchment area of intellectually disabled, autism spectrum disorder, or emotionally disturbed. And that is, specific learning disability, or SLD, has always been higher. It's actually, you can see from the graph, is slightly lower in our area. And so we're doing a better job of servicing those students. That's what that would tell me. And working with those students. However, we're seeing that higher increase in those three areas in looking at it. Other health impaired is another one that continues to stay high. That's a large catchment area. Also, typically students with the primary one there is attention deficit disorder, but there are times that a student may not meet all the criteria for autism spectrum disorder, so they can kind of fall in there. So it's a little muddled in there. So I kind of went over the current programming that we do. We offer direct instruction and classroom support in all of our buildings. The high school offers another layer, which is more of a resource that students may use as opposed to a study hall or something of that nature. The breakdown on the other side is just breakdown of staffing and where they are. I think as we all know, we have a very high number of paraprofessionals in our district. It's something that we are looking at very closely and trying to look at ways to reduce that number. Some of the ones that are at the highest, you can see at the high school or central, I'm just picking a couple, those tend to have those specialized programs, so therefore they have a higher degree of a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 with services needed. So when I looked at it, some of the concerns that I noticed and some of the responses that we had, I can tell you that we have seen this year a doubling of referrals for evaluation to special education. It's not something that has been typically charted, I found out in the past years, of how many referrals we get. So I've got my staff going back and looking at past years, but we were able to look at last year because everyone kept saying it feels like we're getting more kids referred. And so I said, help me prove that. Are we getting more kids referred? And so one of the things we immediately did was we implemented what we call an evaluation planning team model, which is we actually meet when we get a referral. We meet with the parent and the referring team, and we discuss what the purpose of the referral is. And that's helping, I think, the teams understand why they're making referrals and are they making appropriate referrals, but also helping working with parents, because in the past what was done was a referral was sent up to the office, a decision was made up at the office without talking with the parent, without talking with the team, and then it was a yes or a no. And so we're having that conversation in a timely manner with the parents. We feel it's a good model to use. If the referral moves forward, we move right into a planning model, which we have to do, and we start our clocks that we have to do. So we're finding that is being successful. It is a lot of meetings, but we think it's an appropriate use of it. The increased reliance on paraprofessionals, we've introduced a protocol that teams need to look at when they're assigning or asking for paraprofessionals, especially one-on-ones. There wasn't a protocol that was being used. The other piece is we're looking at working with the different schools and how we're using those resources of paraprofessionals. At Central, we were able to identify through our time schedules that up to 5 paras were actually regular education. They were being used for regular education as opposed to special education. And so we've shifted that with Keith, shifted that over to Central as opposed to carrying it on the special ed budget. The school-wide or district-wide versus individual, that has to do with programs and policies that would be put in place. The most known one was the shortened day piece. We immediately put in a protocol for that so that we're not making district-wide. When we look at special education, we're supposed to look at the individual student and be making decisions based on the individual student, not on it's convenient for us as a district to do something. And then the other one was the reducing students that are placed out of district. You know, I think it's known that years ago, Bellows Falls had over 100 students, I think up to 110 possibly students out of district when Sharon Reynolds came on as director. She worked tirelessly to reduce that number. And between what Sharon put in place, what Stacy Alexander put in place, Sam McAllister, and then this year with Michael Harrington, we've reduced that number to 23. And we can look at that number and we can say that of that 23, a large percentage of almost 10 students are currently 11th graders and are going to potentially age out, graduate through the programs. And so we're actually feeling that we are at a point where we can eliminate that position and reallocate those resources to better serve our students. And so, I mean, that only happened because of the work that was done prior to coming in. So when we're looking at next steps, how we're working forward, one of the big things we did was we had a company, a consultant group called Futures Education come in. They spent 2 days here, December 12th and 13th, which was last week. They were in every single building. They interviewed multiple staff from each building. They interviewed regular ed, special ed, paraprofessionals, all the SU administration, the school administration, our related services, and then they are looking at our IEPs and are we complying with our IEPs. And so on the last day they gave us some preliminary findings, and some of the things that they came out with is we need to strengthen our referral process. So even though we've put the EPT in place, we still need to work on that and work on helping regular education understand when they're making a referral, why are they making that referral, and have they looked at everything they can to help that student be successful.
Andy?
Yep.
EPT.
Sorry, the evaluation planning team. Thank you. Sorry. I will try not to use acronyms. I know we are notorious for it. So the other thing is that they said is there needs to be more collaboration between general education and special education. There's kind of a feeling that those are your kids and these are my kids kind of idea. We need to work towards the idea that all students belong to the building or to general education, and special education provides a service to help. They're not special ed students. They're students who just get some extra services. So that's what that piece means. There needs to be consistent vertical alignment within special education. Right now, we do a good job in elementary school, but then the model shifts a little bit when we get to middle school. And then that model shifts again when we go to high school. We need to make sure that our programming is aligned so that students are progressively working towards independence and actually reducing our amount of services. That's our goal, is to reduce our services as opposed to increasing our services. And we're not seeing that consistently moving up and down. Examine the use of paraprofessionals. They thought we had too many also. The eligibility and exit criteria for programs and services, again, it's that same idea. We can do a good job of getting kids into programming, but we don't do such a great job of working kids back into general education and off of the services that we provide. The common understanding of multiple tiers, systems of supports, which is MTSS, that getting that message out at a district-wide level, that the multiple tiers of system is how we support kids in regular education. It's also been referred to as a RTI model, which is response to intervention type of thing. That's an older term used. The MTSS acronym is really what the state is pushing now, looking at that. And then the other preliminary finding they had was a district philosophy for addressing individuals with student needs. And that's coming back to that same idea of working with that collaboration of, do we all have the same common belief that all students can be serviced by highly qualified teachers in the regular ed classroom with supports as needed? And I don't know, I can't speak to that as a district, do we have that belief system unilaterally? So we also, just to kind of go over a little bit of what programs this is moving forward that we're looking at, just some highlights. In the high school, right now we are reviewing and evaluating the course offerings that we have and working with Mr. Hodson and his counseling staff on that. We tend to offer courses that are kind of old school, if you will. The model is a little outdated. And that's going to be a multi-year shift because we can't do everything. But it's also realigning programs that meet students' needs. Right now, again, we don't look at the individual. We tend to say, hey, we have this program. Does this kid fit into the round hole? And not the other way around. At the middle school, it's working towards moving away from, again, it's an archaic system of mostly pull-out and more of an inclusive or push-in model where our special educators are going into the classroom and working collaboratively with teachers. And then at the elementary schools, it's really looking at that programming, going back to the information we have, which is those high numbers of students that are coming through that are in that catchment area of developmentally delayed. Do we have the programming in place to meet those students' needs moving forward? Because right now those students are 3, 4, 5 years old. They're going to be in our system very shortly. You know, do we need to shift our models around or increase our services at that level? We're also looking at partnerships. We're going to be meeting with Landmark College. Superintendent Pratt has set this up to meet with them to talk about professional development that they might be able to provide to staff, so that we can make these adjustments and alignments with regular education and special education. Keene State College, they have a robust special education teaching program. They'd like to partner with us so that we can have a guaranteed stream of interns who would come through the program, but that they're certified teachers, and so we're providing them special education training along with their classwork, which would be, we think would be a good partnership because we also get a good look at staff as they come through. The same thing with the school psychologist certification. We're trying to see if we can work out a similar deal with them, which would help offset some of our, when we're doing evaluations, we have a lot of evaluations. If we have quality interns that are coming in, we might not have to spend so much money with contracted services. When Sky is over, when there's too many, we have to go outside of Sky. That might be a way of cost savings with that partnership. And then also working with the surrounding districts, because all of us are having similar issues. This is not just a Wyndham Northeast problem. And looking at how can we come up with some cost-saving measures. Some of the placements that we have for out of district right now are full, or they're not taking, they have waiting lists, and we all have students who have needs. And so where is that high level of need, and can we help each other out, whether it's through collaboratives or other methods of cost savings to kind of work that out. So that's a big piece of what we're looking at. And then lastly is the multiple tiered systems of support and our educational support teams. We want to continue to work with the district and building level administration to identify what the general education teachers' needs are, to help them understand how they can provide those multiple tiers interventions in the classroom. These are universal interventions. So an example of that might be an accommodation is always the text-to-speech. Well, if all kids have laptops or Chromebooks, they all have, it's built in now to the system, it's a text-to-speech. So it's no longer a special ed service or a special ed accommodation. It's a universal accommodation that we can provide to all students. As simple as teaching instruction of, working around of using wait time. So I ask a student a question, that student who might have slow processing, they raise their hand, they're enthusiastic, they want to give that answer, but they don't have the, they lose the answer in the time. And so the teacher calls on them, and then the kid says, I don't have it, and then they move away from it. They don't cycle back around and say, I'm going to give you a little bit of time, and I'll come back to you. Or as simple as, I'm going to ask you number 4, you're going to answer number 4 for me ahead of time. The child has time to process, come up with the answer, so they can participate in class. Typically, those are actually some of the referrals I'm seeing right now where the teacher says, well, the kid's not ready and I don't know what to do. So providing teachers with those kind of tools, we believe will help, and that's part of the MTSS model, will help with referrals. And I will say this, because I've been asked this question, how do we cut costs? The biggest way we can cut costs is by working with general education so that they are providing supports to all students, and that's going to reduce the referrals. Because all we can do in special education is react to the referrals that we're getting. So when we get a referral, we have a clock, we must do the evaluation, and then we go through it. And then once we have a student, and if they meet all the eligibility criteria, we then have to respond to what that student's needs are. If a lot of those services are provided to students up front through regular education, then that's going to reduce the amount of referrals that are going to come to special education. And that's the other piece of it, is with the educational support teams. That is, every school should have an educational support team in place that is doing this work through regular education. One of the things Futures saw and that I've seen is that we don't have a consistent model throughout the district. So that's all I have. I don't know. Questions?
Sounds like you did a great job, Andy.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just want to say I have a written report that I can make available for you guys that goes in a little more depth. This was kind of just taken from this piece of it, if that's helpful.
Jack?
I was going to say, if you do have something written, that might be a better way to sort of respond to the depth of material you've given us tonight, because I'm feeling like we'd be unfair to you if we just try to respond to everything tonight.
I just like that this is actually a great report presentation, and I feel it was very thorough and a good. For the short time that you've been in the position, it seems like you put it together well and are prepared. I hope to answer Mr. Major's question. Maybe you can do a little bit more research and get some solidification on those numbers. I personally am not surprised, and it's one of the things I think we've all kind of known is that our numbers are high, and maybe just confirming some of that data would be helpful, and you will either make us feel better or worse.
and I would say I think it's knowing that is really important, because that's how we're going to assess what programming our kids need, and so I think it's important to really hone down on that, because the more early interventions we have, potentially we can help kids so that they are successful in regular education and need less services. So that's really the goal there. So,
Andy, it looks like you did a great job here. We'll keep the lines of communication open. I want to just note, for the benefit of people who might see this on TV, that both Matt Trieber and Carolyn Partridge, who represent at least part of the WNESU district, are here tonight. And we're very glad to see you at this table, because obviously we have some concerns that likely you will be able to help us with. And bearing in mind the fact that we have at least a couple of members who won't be able to stay past 7, I would like to turn in the direction of opening a dialogue with Carolyn and Matt. And I guess that where I would like to start is to ask if either of you have anything you would like to tell us up front before we start telling you what we think.
Well, Carolyn has a bill that she's working on, so I think that may be a good place to start.
Well, if you've been paying attention to the print media at all, you're probably aware of the fact that I have been fighting very hard for the Wyndham School in particular, that I have some significant objections to what's happening with Act 46 in general. And so I asked for a bill that would basically impose a moratorium on all forced mergers until this has been legally adjudicated. It's been drafted. I was actually just trying to find it as we were beginning to speak. But it's pretty short and sweet. It has not been it's not been announced yet or made public because we're not there yet.
Sorry, Carolyn.
But I'm also aware of the fact that there are some other representatives who are offering legislation. One in particular would create a waiting period. It would basically stall this for approximately a year until July 1st of 2020, and also phase in the debt disparity issue. It would help to solve the problem in her particular district. And I was also looking for Heidi Sherman. Heidi Sherman represents Stowe, and she is offering legislation as well. And I can't tell you exactly what her bills do, but in any case, I think that there are going to be probably a number of other ones offered on top of the ones that we're working on. So I just basically signed off on the declaration for Wyndham today for the lawsuit that's moving forward. I think you all have voted to be a part of that, or some of you have anyway. And so that, I believe, is going to be filed, maybe not tomorrow, but maybe the following day. So if you have questions.
I would just quickly point out that, as I think Carolyn just said, Stowe has filed their own suit. They have at least one sympathetic legislator who's very much paying attention to the situation. And Carolyn, I believe, is correct about the suit because I wrote a check to the Superior Court for $295 last week at the behest of Dave Kelly. And 4 of the 5 boards at this table tonight are signed on, and I believe the 5th is likely to formally show us some support. And with that, those remarks, are there any members of the board who would like to communicate with either Carolyn or Matt or both of them?
I would like to, I have just one thing, and just ask Carolyn and Matt both, if you would go back to your colleagues. A group of us went up to Barry to a meeting with the State Board of Education, and all of us were treated very, very disrespectfully, very rudely. They did not listen to us or give us any time to really present any case. In fact, I personally believe that they didn't even read the resolution that we had sent to them. And I was just appalled by the way in which we were treated. Well, and, to me, it just was very unprofessional.
That's really unfortunate, and I would apologize on their behalf. If it's any consolation, besides being a state representative for some of the towns sitting around this table, I'm also the chair of the Wyndham School Board, spent countless hours working on our alternative governance structure proposal, which I hand delivered on December 22nd of last year. and in a blinding snowstorm part of the way, just to make things dramatic. And we presented on April 10th before the state board, and not the state board, sorry, the agency. The secretary wasn't actually there. Neither the acting interim secretary or no one was there on that level. But while we weren't treated rudely, I began to wonder when they issued their report if they had read our alternative governance structure report, which I had spent so much time on. So I can sympathize with your position.
The chair is going to recognize the superintendent and then Mr. Breyer.
Yeah, as a superintendent, I agree with what both of you have to say. I think if the articles are actually read, the questions that the state board were asking of Wyndham Northeast would not have been asked. So I was pretty disappointed in regards to the level of the lack of respect that there's a 2-hour drive for 20 minutes tops, and it was very dismissive.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me know that.
Jack.
There are a couple of issues that really bother me with all of this. The Act 46, as it is structured, assumes voluntary compliance. It's really, and every part of it, including the reorganization, says that people will voluntarily assemble with their chair and their clerk to make this happen. There is no provision for people resisting, which I plan to do. But beyond that, when you look at Act 46, and you look at it carefully, one of the things you'll notice is something called the 706B. Is that the terminology? 706B is actually a key element in that bill, and the state is in violation of it. And this is the thing why you need time, if for no other reason, because 706B mandates that whoever is organizing the new entity has to solicit and bring in community members. It has to be a consensual process, and you go forward. The towns that have merged did that. The towns that had alternative governance structures did that. The state, in response, is effectively engaging in municipal bankruptcy, voluntary municipal bankruptcy. And as a result of that, they are the receiver of record. As a receiver of record, they have the same obligation that the individual town districts had to engage in a consensus-based 706B process, which they have manifestly failed to do. The whole point of this is to get the constituencies in a area that's being considered for consolidation to agree on a plan. There is no plan. There is no agreement. This is a basic violation. The state is in violation of their own law. And that's one place where we need time, if only to get the individuals at the AOE and the Board of Education to sit down with the stakeholders and come up with an agreement. That agreement might be consolidation, but it might also be the alternative governance structures. It's not a ruling. There was no ruling. That's not the process that's envisioned in the law. The process envisioned in the law is a 706B process. There is illegal, and it needs to be dealt with. Point one. Point two, you cannot take property, you cannot assign debts, according to the U.S. Constitution and laws that go back to the Dartmouth case in the early, 1790s, or late 1790s. It was something that came up almost as soon as the delegates first assembled in the first U.S. Congress. When the state of New Hampshire decided that Dartmouth College would make a dandy university to try to dissolve it by mandate and distribute the assets to a new entity. That was voted. That was deemed unconstitutional, and I don't think we've changed that part of the Constitution. And that's another reason why the law, as written, needs to be examined for an obvious constitutional flaw, And that's something that the legislators need to understand, because if they don't fix this, they risk unwinding the entire act, which an awful lot of communities have already signed up to. And so they can either modify this by insisting the state follow its own rules, or put a provision in that says, notwithstanding any other part of the act, that the property and debts cannot be transferred, which would be dandy. That might concentrate minds. And if no other reason, put things aside until these clear constitutional issues are resolved, for fear that the whole thing is going to be blown up, which I am quite confident it will be.
Well, on top of that, Jack, and I agree with you on your points, but on top of that, there's just a practical thing here as well. And Wyndham engaged Mark Ottinger, who is a former general counsel for the Agency of Education, as we move forward with our ballot language, which was approved, by the way, on a vote of 67 to 11, to authorize the school board, which I chair, to sell the school to the town and to tuition our kids out. Now, I would much prefer to remain a public school, but Mark Ottinger, former
Mark.
general counsel for the agency, so I think you could say the former Donna Russo Savage, allowed as how that the rule of thumb used to be that you would allow for a certain period of time to pass to allow everything to sort of sugar off, and for just the practicality of it. And a perfect example of this is now Wyndham is planning, we had our board meeting at the beginning of the month, we're looking at our budget for next year. Technically, we're supposed to be merged, but the West River Mud isn't planning on us being merged, and so we're sort of in la-la land. And although I'm not in la-la land, I'm moving forward with our budget. We're going to be a school next year, but this is a great example. So Stowe and Elmore and Morristown are now all of a sudden supposed to very precipitously come together and put together a budget for their merged district. I mean, it's just crazy.
Well, the 706B process sort of envisions a year, but we're talking weeks now.
Yeah.
And for that, if for no other reason, there really needs to be an emergency stop to at least let that process work its way through. And it really, with an emphasis on the voluntary compliance, because there's no force of law that says that if our individual chairs and clerks said, "Hi, pound sand," that anything would happen, because there is no fallback, there is no force of law, and there really is no assumption that people would actually resist, which I thought was the most clueless part of the law.
The chair would like to recognize Stephen Major.
Just thanks for your good work going forward, and but going forward, I want to express something that I feel, and I think others do as well, is that we're not just looking for more time so that the Board of Education can impose its mandate next year without any change. What we want to do is, more time is fine, but they have to listen, they have to read the alternative governance plans, they have to consider that alternative governance plans are part of Act 46. They've got to do their part. And so it can't be just a one-sided, we'll give you more time to get used to it. And I'm afraid of the standard approach of, well, this is difficult, it'll just take more time, but it's still going to end up that way. And I want the legislature carefully to consider that it may not end out how the Board of Education has devised it. They may be actually wrong. So I would wish that it'd be something that isn't just giving the more time to get to an already predefined goal, that all these affected towns and badly affected towns may have a good point, and there may be other ways to move forward, and the Board of Education may have to change its mind. And there needs to be a process, including reading our acts of our alternative governance plans, to get there.
Well, based on some of the comments that I think have been made by board members, I think that they're anticipating that this is, going to go to court, and that there's going to be some change that gets made. And if in fact the towns, including Wyndham, which are part of the lawsuit, and some of you guys are too, if we prevail, then the act will be found to be unconstitutional, and it's back to the drawing board as far as I can tell.
There's the severability clause in there.
So
it's
talk
right.
more about it.
Sorry. So, well, I'll preface my comments by letting Carolyn off the hook and saying that I'll speak for myself, and I'll get around to the severability thing. But there's a severability thing, so that if the act was found unconstitutional, they would find those specific parts unconstitutional and not necessarily kill the entire act. So going to court and having portions of it found unconstitutional doesn't necessarily kill the entire bill.
But a major part of this is
unless
has
it
to
collapses,
do with forced mergers.
Unless it collapses in on itself.
And taking a property.
Right.
And I think that is going to be a big problem for Act 46.
Mm-hmm. So, going back to the atmosphere that goes on in Montpelier about this is that the Act 46 is the culmination of years and years and years of discussion about property taxes.
No.
Well, that is it.
Excuse.
It
maybe a false premise, but it's the premise.
It came about because as an answer to what to do about property taxes. We can talk about right or wrong approach or anything like that, but that's where it comes from. And for a lot of representatives, that is all it is about, is what is the bottom line and what does it end up costing or saving on property taxes in the long run. I don't want to give these boards false hope. I think that the relief from anything that's going on is almost best coming in judicial form, in my opinion, because when you look at the minority of school districts throughout the state that are actually impacted by the forced merger thing, what'll end up happening is, or what I would fear would happen, is you're going to see a bunch of bills come in, a little bit of this, a little bit of that will get pulled from each one, and if the legislature decides to act based on a minority of representatives truly affected by, or their districts truly affected by it, you could end up with the legislature trying to create one bill that's sort of a fix-all for it. The problem with that is whenever we try to tweak a complex process to make it fit, we get it wrong more often than not. And anyone who doubts that has to only look at explaining the property tax system to me. The reason that I'm supportive of the approach that Carolyn's taking is that it at least allows a fair hearing for individual aggrieved school districts in front of a court to be able to get the relief that they actually need, absent having to convince a group of people that don't want to change anything because for them it is truly about property taxes and not about local school governance. Then I'm worried about what the end result could be.
Carol.
Well, what I find ironic, and I think that Matt is probably correct, but what I find ironic about that is that I don't believe that property taxes are going to go down as a result of Act 46. In fact,
I don't
think
either.
They're going to go up.
I don't think it will.
Our
either.
superintendent at a couple of, and by the way, I want to say right out front that I really appreciate the work that Bill Antone has done as our superintendent. And he and the business manager have both said at two of our meetings, we don't tape our meetings, but they're on the record, and at least one of them is saying that it's going to cost more. Anytime, we couch this, one of the frustrating things is, there is this concern about property taxes, when in fact, 2/3 of Vermonters pay based on their income. But if you're going to, if you're going to say, well, we actually want to just give more opportunity for our kids. This is for equitable and better opportunities. Our superintendent said, if you're going to provide more programs, it's going to cost more. And so, and just the cost of giving the incentives to the towns, we're all paying for those incentives, whether we went for the carrot or not. And so, ultimately, I mean, the West River Mud Board, we have a representative on that board for the purposes of 7th through 12th grade. They're looking at an increase, a 10% increase in their budget. So, it's, I don't think it's going to be saving money.
I want to be clear, I'm not making the argument for it that way. I'm just saying that is the thought process that's been going on as part of this. And I want to be realistic. Carolyn and I, this part I probably can speak for, we're willing to fight for whatever helps the boards move forward in a proper way. But I also want to be realistic that there's potentially going to be a whole group of people that A, don't want to see it changed, or B, only want to see a small portion that affects their district but not something else. So,
Jack, I'm going to recognize you in just a moment.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm going to query the representatives. And by the way, Matt, I think that your assessment is actually pretty accurate of the mood currently, although I also sense that there may be a number of white knights that emerge between now and the time the legislature reconvenes, because nobody wants to be on the wrong side of history. But I have a question, and it's really a question to both of you. You know that the boards are very concerned, which is why you have the boards here tonight for the purpose of having the conversation. How do we help you help us?
I would just say that I would like you to keep your eyes on what's going on in Montpelier. Matt sits on appropriations. I chair the Agriculture and Forestry Committee. I assume we're going to be in those positions again, but who knows? And I'm stuck in a room all day long, and he basically is too. And so there's stuff that goes on in the Education Committee that I try to track. I usually try and have a committee member in there that I liaise with. But I would encourage you all to be paying attention and to watch what's going on in that committee. And then if there's something that you're concerned about, let us know. I'll say it, there's a 1-800 number, 1-800-322-5616. That's the free toll-free number at the Sergeant-at-Arms office. They'll send us a message and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. So,
Thank you, Carolyn. I do see your hand up, Deb, and I would like to recognize you, and I think that Jack is probably not done with his delegation yet, so we'll certainly give him another whack at you. Go ahead.
So I simply want to say, once your bills are introduced, yours and other legislators, there'll be an opportunity for witnesses, in which case you've got more than plenty in your area and our district that would be willing and ready and able to go up there in force.
One caveat for that.
Is that?
One caveat for that is that if the committee chooses to take the bills up, or
right, no, of course, once they're taken. Right, I understand that. But there's an opportunity for something that additionally we need to keep track of, so that we can, or also written testimony can be sent as well if a party cannot make it up. And they get an opportunity to accept or deny witnesses. Is that how it works?
Well, they I guess can usually on a something like this, if a bill is coming up that's introduced by Carolyn and I'm a co-sponsor of it, And it's coming up. Typically, the chair would allow for those witnesses to actually testify that are from or affected by that bill.
They
Joan,
generally
did you
give
wanna
us.
respond to Deb as well?
They basically, I mean, the way I run my committee is everybody who introduces a bill gets at least 10 minutes to present it. And I would assume that that sort of thing would happen here as well. So I would expect that, you know, we'd be called in and we'd get 5 or 10 minutes to present our bill. I think given the fact that this is going to be in court and it's going to be drawn a lot of attention, I suspect that, you know, they'll be taking a pretty close look at it, as well as all of the other bills that are going to be introduced on Act 46 as well.
And if I could answer your question from
yeah, go
before,
right.
the
Please do
other
that.
thing that I would say is, because this is a lawsuit and it's juicy, it's fun, it's going to get some media attention, have some points available when speaking to get the story out, so that when it gets picked up by VT Digger and other people are reading it, they know some of the trials and tribulations that the boards are facing, so that it helps tell the story to other people up there as well.
Thank you, that's sage advice. Jack, I'm going to recognize you in just a moment.
No
I thought I saw a
problem.
hand down there in the Westminster delegation. Oh, Cheryl, go ahead.
I was going to restate something just to make sure I clearly understand it. I think that, like Carolyn, you have said that you will present a bill that poses a moratorium on all forced mergers, and that would mean that we need not proceed if that bill goes through.
So I'll read you the statement of purpose.
Okay.
On the legislation. It says, this bill proposes to place a moratorium on school district mergers ordered by the State Board of Education until legal issues are adjudicated.
Exactly. And then to Matt's point, you think that to be in court is a far better way for the towns and the children to achieve what we're really looking for here, because of the sort of, I'll use a hodgepodge word, approach that might come out of the legislature.
So
I do, personally.
Okay,
we
thank
are
you.
we are two people amongst
178 others,
right, 150 in the House
and 30 in the Senate.
and 30 in the Senate. So, you know, I think that the legal action will potentially have a more immediate effect, and that what we're doing is, you know, basically stating, I think, our intention and what we would like to see, but it's going to take a lot of work to convince 148 other people to agree with us, or at least, let's say, 76 total.
And then if we manage to get that far, then it goes into the other body and they get another crack. So I'm just to tailor make it to the relief that you need. I definitely believe in the courts, for that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that bill does appear to infer that the bill infers a ongoing legal process, because
Yes.
it's a moratorium until legal
Yes,
process
exactly right.
produces a solution.
Yeah.
So the legal process has to go forward.
Exactly.
Otherwise, the bill doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
My last comment would be that I'm incredibly grateful that there's already one suit on the table, one that has been filed, and that imminently, 32 districts, including several of us around this table, will be adding to another one. I think it's very healthy. What I've seen of the issues being raised are incredibly significant, and I do hope that the legal system serves us well.
I do too.
Ed, and then Jack, please.
Just a very quick question. What would be the timing of the proposal for the bill? Would it really make a difference prior to January? Could it be put through before the January 29th deadline?
January 29th deadline
Could
for
your
what?
bill, could your bill go through before the January 29th deadline that we are required to hold our transitional meeting?
No, sure that's not.
It'll be offered. It'll be offered right away.
So the answer to your question is technically yes,
Well,
it could.
well, let's talk
Realistically, no.
Okay, so realistically,
It can't
it's a
become
nice
law in
shot,
that time.
But right now, it's not going to help us in the short term. That a strategy of working through the courts is obviously going to be the strongest strategy.
We're convening on the 9th, I believe,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
correct.
So for it to get introduced, get through committee, get through the floor, get through third reading, rest, go to the Senate, do the same process, rest again. That's assuming no changes, and then get to the governor for signature. You're out of time, way before that.
Approximately. I'm not holding it feet to the fire, but,
I'd say March at the soonest for something to become law.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something like that.
So significantly out there.
Yeah.
Question answered, Ed?
Absolutely.
Jack?
I looked at not only 46, which at this point I can quote from memory, I think, but also looked at the enabling legislation for the State Board of Education, which is something that ought to be looked at much more closely because it's interesting. One of the provisions in SBE rulings that they are subject to legislative review by the education committees. And I am wondering if it would be possible to have said committees put out a resolution to the effect that forced mergers are not practical under the meaning of the word in Act 46. When we sat in these interminable meetings before the SBE, it became very clear that they were locked in on two words. And the word preferred, which got interpreted as not all else being equal, we will prefer to take the consolidation route, but it became a mandate that no matter how superior the alternative governance program was, that it really preferred meant we don't care. That I mean, it was very clear, and the transcripts of those meetings will support what I'm saying. The second word was the word practical. And this is the one why John Carroll voted against the proposal, and it's I think, a key word, because it is not ever practicable to create an entity that is not supported by the constituencies it's supposed to represent. If there was no support for the state of Vermont, the state of Vermont could not exist as a viable entity. If there was no support for the United States of America, there would not be a United States of America. You cannot simply create a box and say, this is a voluntary corporation to which you are invited to enter in. That never works. It is not practical because you have the overwhelming problem of legitimacy. It is never practicable to form a body whose basic rationale for being is considered illegitimate by the people that it's supposed to draw its power from, and that's what you're dealing with here. So if you can go and if you can get the legislative bodies, the education committees, to do their job under the law, review the process, and declare that it is never practical to create forced districts in the face of community opposition, you pretty well lock this up, and you don't have to go to 76 people. You have to go to whatever the dozen that you have in those committees. And I think it's a faster strategy, and it might be a face-saving one.
That would still have to pass the House floor.
I think, from what I understand, the law just refers to the committee. It doesn't refer to the body as a whole.
Which committee?
The Education Committee of the legislature. That's how it's written. I mean, that's what it says. It might be another piece of
committee may have oversight over
enough of it.
A committee may have oversight over something.
That's what it says in the law. I don't, whether or not that again would pass muster if ever tested. It's another question, but there it is.
Be an interesting question for our ledge council, but I'd be very surprised to hear them say that a committee could issue a resolution that was binding on the State Board of Education for something like that.
I don't think so.
Well, then even as a sense of the House to that effect would be sufficient.
Right. It might be sloppy writing. Mm-hmm. Did they ever define practicable?
No, and and I looked, because usually when you write proper legislation, you define all your terms, and there's just lots of that in this particular piece.
Yeah.
I want to take note of the fact that the legislators, Matt and Carol, have been unusually generous with their time tonight, which I think I can say on behalf of this board, we greatly appreciate. I would like to just find out if there are any other questions or comments around the table before we release them to continue with their other responsibilities. Are there any other questions or comments? I'm not hearing any. Thank you very much for taking the time to come in and talk with us. I think it's really important that we have a understanding of each other, and it's been really useful, at least for me, and I presume for everybody else around this table. So thank you.
Thanks, David.
And you're welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting.
Actually, I need to go home and eat dinner. I just have one word, and that is resist. But I think you're already doing that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your time.
Where would you like to take us now, Superintendent Pratt? To Edie?
Edie.
Hi, Edie.
You ready?
Hi. Yeah. I'm ready. As far as your financial goes, nothing new in the revenues. There are a couple changes in the expenditure report. On line 163, which is page 7 of 25, under speech salaries assistant, one of the assistants has been moved from the general fund into the Idea B grant, and the tech coordinator, who used to be in the general fund, is now going into Title IV as the STEM coordinator. And that's about it for major changes. We've got the grants pretty well done, so we can start including those. Not much sense of printing them out because they weren't complete, but all the grants should be complete now, so we'll start including them in your financials. But other than that, we're in good shape.
Okay, any questions for Edie? Thanks, Edie.
Yeah.
Do we have a superintendent's report?
It's enclosed,
Okay.
and but if anyone has any questions on it, I'd be more than happy to field them.
With the board's forbearance, I would like to back up and approve the minutes of November 28th and the October 5th.
It'd be December 5th, not October 5th?
Yes, December 5th.
Thank you. Yes. Would you like to make that a motion for me, Harold?
Yeah, I make a motion that we accept the minutes of both November 28th and December 5th.
Okay, is there a second? Come on, second, Lynn, thank you. Okay, we have a motion on the floor to approve the minutes of November 28th and December 5th. Are there any corrections to those minutes? Okay, then all those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we've done that. New business for discussion and action. An early retirement for middle school SPED teacher.
Yes, I have Susan Rugg. I'll just read. She wrote, "I wish to retire as a special education teacher at the Bellows Falls Middle School, effectively December 31st, 2018. Please note, as this date is earlier than I had previously intended."
Okay, is there an administrative recommendation?
Recommend that we accept her resignation.
Okay, how about a motion on that one?
I move that we accept the resignation.
Okay.
Stated.
Okay, how about a second, Charles?
Yeah.
Good, we have a motion and a second. Discussion under the motion, that's to accept Susan Rugg's retirement effective December 31st.
Just one statement. Now, is this someone that we are now going to have to find someone to replace, or is this something that we can just?
Yes, and that's something that Mr. Haas is working on. Yep.
All right.
Any other questions? All right, then, all those in favor of the motion to accept the resignation of Susan Rugg effective December 31st, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, you have your motion.
Thank you.
Tell us about the buses.
All right, I know we had this discussion prior, but I did want to come back once we had a possible invoice of what it would cost to repair that bus. So currently, and I have another option that we've that Stanley, the transportation coordinator, has, I guess, stumbled upon. So let me tell you, first of all, what the current, and this is an invoice, it's not a estimate. So right now we're up to $19,765 on repairing of that bus. What he has come across is that
Approved 11,000.
Yeah.
that was the estimate. Now the invoice is up to 19,000.
But didn't we?
Now the estimate-
Didn't we approve an amount? I believe we approved an amount.
Yes, nothing's been spent yet.
Okay.
That's why I'm coming back to the board, because Stanley has been working on this. So I know at the end of the last meeting, because it was an estimate, the board had asked to get what is more of an actual. This is more the actual of what it would cost to fix that bus.
So they haven't actually done any work?
No work has been done on the bus yet.
Oh, okay.
None. Zip.
Just a clarifying question. So this would be a quote then, as opposed to
This is a firm estimate or whatever you want. It's not quite, it's not an invoice.
Right. They put it on an invoice form, so I'm just reading off what the actually is, but it is actually a quote rather than an estimate on what it was cost. And I asked Stanley, could this go up even further? He said it could. So what he, I've had him explore some of the different options that were that the board had discussed at our last meeting, and he has come across from one of the companies that he works through or with, is that around mid-January there will be a propane bus that is going to be turned in. I can't remember the name of the company. It may be Catamount. That it's a 3-year lease from Massachusetts. It's a Bluebird and it's a propane bus, and we'd be able to get it for $50,000.
How old is it?
It's 3 years old. Just coming off a 3-year lease, and it's being turned in. So we do have another option rather than just paying the $20,000 that we're up to now to fix the bus that we'll be trading in next year. Is that correct, Edie? Or if the board would like us to move forward with the propane 3-year-old bus.
Rick.
To move things forward, as someone who supported vociferously the cheap used bus idea, using Stephen Major's math of $10,000 a year or so of depreciation and thinking of an $80,000+ new bus and 3 years at $10,000, I will propose that we buy the $50,000 bus that has a similar depreciation rather than paying $19,000 for a bus that we're guessing may last a year and is above that $10,000.
All right.
So to review the math from last time.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, Harold's got the second. We're under discussion. Stephen, you had a interesting mathematical formula.
I was just going to let you carry forward because you remembered it better than I did.
we said we were guessing like if the bus lasted 8 years or so,
Yeah,
and it cost $80,000+, so it was 10-ish, whatever.
That's why the price is 50 now. I mean, it's all following the same math.
Yeah, it's in the right ballpark, and it's
I was
propane.
just curious. I swear, and maybe my mind is not quite there, but we were told that, oh no, you can't lease a bus, and now we're thinking about buying a bus coming off a lease.
Right.
Because it's not our lease. It's a some place in Massachusetts. They're a 3-year lease up on this bus. They're
What I'm
turning
saying
it back
is we
over
were
to
told
the
we couldn't lease a bus because there's no such thing as leasing a bus, and now we're buying a bus that just came off of a lease.
Well, who knows what they do in Massachusetts? I mean,
are we saying
Well, and
that
we
this
call
bus is
it-
coming from Massachusetts, so they may allow schools to lease buses in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
So
We call loans leases, but they aren't really a lease, they're a loan.
Is there mileage in this bus?
I didn't ask Stanley, but
I think it's
Deb,
we can't
I can
assume
check
that.
So
on that for
using
you.
that math extrapolation, we would only get 5 years out of that bus.
Yes.
We can rent
5
a bus.
years.
Yeah.
That's different.
Which is still better than 1 year for that one.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that might give us 2 years and get us to its 10-year-old.
But it's still going to cost $20,000 a year. I mean, $10,000 a year. So same deal.
I know, but at the same time, we'll be replacing that bus in 5 years instead of 10.
Maybe.
Because it's used, it's had 3 years on it already, not knowing the mileage. And if we actually spend if you lose $10,000 a year on it, you will only have it for 5 years.
Yeah.
So,
Did anyone look into bus rental for the remainder of the year?
I think.
I asked Stanley about it, but I never heard back what he found.
And if that bus is being turned in, if its lease is up in January, when would we actually be able to take delivery of it?
Mid-January. I mean, it's going to be turned in before then. It would be available for us mid-January.
And all of our buses go about 10 years.
Deb.
The second part of the question, if I could ask, was have new items, since it's been, I'm assuming has been looked at to give us a quote or a hard numbers, has more things been added to that list beyond the things that were on the first time when we voted on the $12,000?
Yeah,
There's more on there that would make it 19,000.
Yeah, I'm not positive what it is, but the list seems to be
More extensive?
another half a page long.
Yeah, see, there's more things there. So, and are all those necessary or just could they do without them?
My understanding, it would need to be done to fix the bus, and for pass any inspections it would need. This is what it would get it, with no promises that it would get us to the end of the year or another year or 2 years. It's just to get it going and on the road right now.
Josh, can we have the motion again, please?
I was going to ask if someone could be so kind as to repeat the motion.
Rick, let's have your motion again, please.
Move that we purchase the used propane bus when it's available for $50,000.
And what was the firm price on that bus, Chris?
$50,000.
Okay, so purchase used propane bus as described for not more than $50,000.
That's perfect, David. Thank you.
And Harold did second that. And Edie, do we have the money lined up?
I can get that. The bank was willing to loan us for a year. And so in next year's budget, we have one lease and one loan payment. And then, so I would say that this would be our purchase for next year. And then we could borrow for a second bus and pay off this year's lease. So we aren't budgeting for more than 2 buses a year.
And you do not anticipate that this would create a deficit in the current operating year?
No, that's why I went and looked into borrowing so that we wouldn't run a deficit in the current year. And they are willing to loan us the money for a year or 2 years.
Cheryl.
I just, in discussion, wonder if we need to amend this motion to say that this reverses the board's previous decision to spend not more than $12,000 to repair the current bus.
Why don't you make that amendment, Cheryl, and we'll ask the maker if that would be regarded as a friendly amendment.
I think Josh has it.
Okay, and I see your hand, Kristen.
Do you do an inspection or look at the mileage, or are we just assuming it's all in good shape, the bus? Or is there a process, or has it already been done?
No, I mean, I haven't had Stanley go forward any further with this until I got some more clarification with the board, to, as another option for you.
But
we
wanna
absolutely
make sure
would,
of that
yes.
before we spend the money?
Yes,
Okay.
the mileage, it would be all based on what
Okay.
those are. Yeah, absolutely.
Rick, can I query you on your motion? Your motion, I take it, it is implicit that the bus would be able to immediately enter service for Wyndham Northeast upon purchase. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. I think we have clear clear understanding of the motion, and you did accept Cheryl's friendly amendment?
More than happy to.
Okay, all right then. Josh, what have we got?
So Rick's motion is to purchase a used propane bus for $50,000 to be immediately available for use upon purchase. And then Cheryl Charles offered a friendly amendment to the motion to reverse the previous motion that would limit the expenditure at $11,000. Excuse me.
I have.
Yes.
This might be the minority opinion, but I will vote no on spending $50,000 on a bus because I think this is somewhat of a reactionary purchase, and I'm not sure that all the research has been done to lay out the options available. We've been on one bus for a month in Grafton, and to be sure that down the line we're making the right decision, I would rather wait it out another 2 weeks to get more information on the options available. We had asked about rentals and leasing and what the cost would be for the next 6 months to do that. And then what other, we seem to be kind of geographically limited in our bus shopping. And I would just like to see more research presented before I vote yes to spend $50,000 on a used bus, especially being that I personally don't know the sort of return on investment on a used bus versus a new bus.
Bearing in mind Jessa's cautionary warning, I would like to know if there's further discussion before we consider the motion.
So is this a 2015, 2016 bus? Do we know?
Stanley said it was 3 years old, so
Near the first of the year, so that could be a
either
15 or a 16. I've been trying to search for places that rent or lease buses, and I didn't
Jack
find
and I have found a couple.
I just found one right away.
National Bus Lease or something.
I found a bunch that rent them like by the day, but I haven't really found anything.
I
that's
found
honest.
daily, weekly, monthly, yearly.
That was last meeting.
Yeah.
Jack.
Buses are like salt budgets. If you spend too much, I always said that if you spend too much time on it, you can see a grown man cry, because I just hate this type of stuff. I know so little about this, I feel embarrassed voting on it. I did find that state of Kansas, state of Nebraska, and state of Missouri have things called bus depreciation schedules that they use as a guide for all states, and God knows why. But it does say that buses should depreciate anywhere between 12.5% and 15%, depending on whose figures you use per year. And so by that, but if it's a 3-year-old bus, then that 50% off is reasonable. If it's a 5-year-old bus, we're paying a real premium for it. So for whatever that's worth, I would hope that if we go forward with this, there might be a little dickering about what that price is.
Okay. Bearing in mind that the motion on the floor is to purchase a serviceable used bus for $50,000, and we can go back to the exact language if anyone would like it. Is there further discussion under the motion? All right then. EDS.
The only thing I can comment is that I do keep a depreciation schedule. The state actually gives us back about 45% of 1/7 of the bus. So for the first 7 years, we do get about 45% of it back. So I do keep that, and so that any bus that you buy, you can take 1/7 of it and include it in the formula. Just so you know, and we have 4 different transportation formulas, so that is one of them.
Did Stanley make a recommendation?
yeah, Stanley is very adamant that fixing the bus that we currently have is the wrong thing to do. I mean, so if no matter how depending on how this vote goes, I would need another directive from the board in regards to differ from the last one, because the last, as we know, was to fix the bus. when I got that, this back in doubling in price, I felt the obligation to come back to the board and say, this is what it is now. I'm more than happy to, if this vote goes down that you do not want to purchase the bus, I am more than happy to, with directors from the board, have Stanley look into what it would, if it is possible, to lease and explore. When I did bring that to him, he wasn't too optimistic that we're going to be able to lease something. You know, I can only go on his professional knowledge and background on that because I surely don't have it. But I will take any directives from the board in regards to moving forward with this.
Rick Holloway.
So what happens if we decline both of these things? If we say, okay, we're not going to fix this bus, and we vote against purchasing a bus? Jessa spoke about Grafton being on a single bus. So what happens to the transportation for the next month, 2 months, while if we work through this? Are we limited in getting the kids to school? Are we limited in getting them around? Or is it more of like, if another bus breaks, then we've got a problem? What's kind of, does anybody have any?
Well, in Grafton, some kids now have to get the bus early and some kids get the bus late because there's one bus. So it does affect the school. I was just saying that we've been getting by. We're kind of used to
Right,
bus
and so is
struggles,
that because
but-
of this situation, or is
Yeah,
that?
that's because of this situation. But I'm willing, if Stanley, I'm willing to accept Stanley's professional opinion, I guess, on this.
And that's
Hi-
what
that's
and
what we
that's
hired
I've
him
been going
for,
by too,
so-
because I'm not an expert in this field, so I got to rely on Stanley and any of you who have experience in this field.
Harold.
If we were to say no to both of these and say that we wanted to buy a brand new bus, we still would have a long waiting period to get a brand new bus, right?
Right.
And then I'd have to ask Edie, do we have $100,000 to buy a
We
brand
would
new?
have to borrow.
Yeah, but still, I mean.
Josh, can we have that motion again, please?
Well, and to clarify Jack's point, the new bus was 80
Was it
something
80?
thousand.
Yeah, 80.
Yeah.
Yeah.
88,
So
86, 88.
it's not a 50% off. It's like 30.
Well, they say that I'm looking at the Kansas sheet right now, and they have 12.5% per year compounded as off the list.
Yeah,
So
and that would bring it down to about 53,000 if it's
well,
3 years old. So
there you go. So sounds, it's
Consultant
just
right here.
just as one point, it may matter not at all, but we have made a commitment to get to a propane fleet. This would get us in that direction, and because I was in a previous brain deadening conversation about buses several years ago when we bought the Harvester, there were questions raised about the reliability of that when we bought it, and apparently they turned out to be true. And so and I think Stanley was the one that raised those issues, and he turns out to be right. So I'm taking his opinion in this case.
Jessa, you have a comment?
I just have one. What would be the financial impact of going to $86,000 borrowed to buy a new bus?
Well, we would just borrow it for a year. We have money in the budget to pay for 2 buses. One loan that we took out this year and one new one for next year.
And is the bus that is scheduled to be replaced next anyway?
We were
That's
hoping
what
to
I've been
get
told.
through this year with it. It's in pretty bad repair, and so they haven't been using it like they have some of the other buses.
But it was the next one we were going to purchase anyway.
That's what Stanley has told me.
that's
Yeah.
what I understood.
So to that point, one of the things we were trying to get to was a replacement schedule for the buses, because we had X number of 2008 buses, and so we were trying to get, by buying 2 per year, whatever we've been doing, we were trying to get to the point where we didn't have a bunch. So one of the concerns I would have about the used bus is now we're going back to where we're going to have 3
Off year.
2015,
Yeah.
16 buses. Then I have the concern if we decide to buy a new bus that we're not gonna get it until April.
What is the delivery on a new bus?
3 to 4 months for propane.
Yeah.
Well, National Bus Service that I was just looking at has one.
A brand new one?
They have a 2019 with 2,000 miles on it.
Sold.
How much?
I'd have to
Call for price?
call for
Wheels
price.
on the bus go round and
But
round.
they did have long-term leasing programs, rental and leasing programs as well. So.
Let us review the motion again with Josh and see where we go here. Josh?
Sort of a patchwork, so correct me if I'm wrong. Rick Gordon moved to purchase a used serviceable propane bus for $15,000 to be immediately available upon purchase. Harold Noyes seconded. Cheryl Charles offered a friendly amendment to the motion to reverse the previous motion on December 5th that would limit the expenditure at $11,000. Rick Gordon accepted the friendly amendment.
So what was the dollar figure you had for buying the used bus?
50,000.
Okay, I heard you say 15, and I was going to say.
Yes. Sold.
Well, all right. Is there further discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. I have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Point of
5.
order.
Are you SU
I don't
board?
even. I don't even. It's
an
not
SU
clear
matter.
because all the other boards have been here and are waiting. I was. What
Let's
do you
keep those hands up if you're SU, please, in favor of the motion. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is that correct? Okay. Opposed, please raise your hand. I have 4 opposed, so it appears that we will purchase that used bus, and I hope we get a lot of use out of it. Thank you for work.
David, point of order. It's very unclear to me because we did call the other boards to order, and we were in the process of a joint board meeting, which was warned at 6:30. Where we are, or what meeting we're actually attending, and where we're
I can
going.
answer that. Both got mashed together.
They got well. They seem to appear to be mashed together, and my only concern is with some time commitments. And are we getting to the agenda of the joint meeting? Because there's numbers here for the joint meeting.
That is correct. The intent here was to try to bowl through the SU agenda fairly quickly. We opened with Andy Haas' presentation at the recommendation of the superintendent, and I thought it was a darn good idea while we had members of the legislature here to demonstrate that we take special ed concerns and costs very seriously. We went back and met with the legislators because I felt it was a courtesy to try to hold those discussions promptly, and we're trying to get through the SU agenda and keep moving. We don't have very much left on the SU agenda, and I do have a weather eye on the time. Okay, thank you for bringing that point up, Stephen. We have a vendor contract. Can you tell us what that is, Chris?
I didn't put it on the agenda, I'm not sure.
Not aware of what it is, so I guess we're just gonna go right on over it. Do we have any staff hires?
I do not.
No staff hires. Okay, old business for discussion and action. Discussion of parameters for teacher negotiations. The negotiating committee has met with the representatives from the teachers union. We agreed on ground rules. We have another meeting scheduled, I believe, for tomorrow.
Tomorrow at 5 o'clock.
At 5 o'clock. And that will be at least an initial exchange of proposals. The ground rule call for an initial exchange of proposals, and then the following meeting, other new items can be entered for consideration, and after that we lock it down and start bargaining in earnest. I wanted this on here because I'm not certain as to where the constituent boards are in terms of letting their negotiators know what they want or what they don't want. So I've once again taking note of the time, would prefer not to take us in as the joint boards, at least at this hour, to hash it out, because I'm not certain that would be a productive discussion. I would like to go around the table while we do have the reps here and find out, which boards have had discussion around negotiations. Rick?
I would like to note that while we are in the public eye, and that we keep in mind that negotiations are, we should be cautious about what we say on
Yes,
an
and
open
my
meeting
my
session.
question here, and let me reframe this in Rick Holloway's terms. I'm not asking what you've discussed. I'm asking if boards have had the discussion. Has Westminster had the opportunity to discuss negotiations in terms of your asks and your
We have a delegate who's sat in on the meetings. We as a board have not.
Okay, so you've been able to give guidance to your negotiator. Okay, and high school did meet. Was it Monday night or was it last Monday? These are all running together on
Last Monday,
last
because
Monday.
I wasn't around.
And we did have a discussion. Rockingham, is Rockingham?
We have not had a discussion.
Okay. Athens?
We have not.
Okay. Grafton?
We have not.
Okay. Okay, well then, I'm going to suggest that if there's an appetite for it, we could hold an executive session at the end of our meetings tonight and have a big free-for-all, or if we can get these local meetings, get it on the agenda of the local meetings in a timely fashion, so we can at least get back for the second meeting, which will actually be the third meeting, I suppose, with teachers, whereby we have to have all of our proposals on the table. We can approach it that way.
I would suggest the latter.
Okay. And I'm leaning in the direction of your suggestion, Ed.
I agree with that.
Okay. All right. There seems to be some unanimity around that, so if you could stay on top of the scheduling on that, Chris?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
So I would suggest that our negotiation committee too, when we're scheduling the second/third meeting. So our first meeting was organizational, and then because the way it's structured, there's presentations happen at meeting A, meeting B, one meeting, two meetings. So I think we should, if we want to get that information back to the negotiating team, that when we're scheduling the third meeting, we should keep in mind and maybe do that after the next SU meeting, so we're able to gather that information here and bring it back.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. So we are through item 5. Item 6 is the I guess what I would refer to it as the merger end of the SU meeting, and the item 6 says the agenda for WNESU joint meeting. Everybody had 3 agendas tonight to work with. Okay. So let us move in the direction of that SU meeting, joint meeting of the boards. We already are called to order. Are there any adjustments? Did you receive any communication from the Vermont School Boards Association, Chris?
No, I have not.
Okay. Are there any other communications or public comments? Okay. New business for discussion and action. Select spokesperson. The intent of this item was that when and if we become embroiled in litigation with the State Board of Education, it's my opinion, and not necessarily only my opinion, that it may turn out to be wise to designate a spokesperson for the boards with regard to the litigation. And I would like to get that idea out there. I don't know to what degree the various boards have spent time discussing how to approach the issue of communication, but I would imagine by this time next week, we will be litigating. Actually, probably by the end of the week. And is there strong sentiment or feedback from the boards on this? And this, by the way, is an open question to all members, irregardless of whether they are sitting here in the capacity as voting reps of the supervisory union or not. Cheryl.
Just to share recent history from Westminster, there have been several articles in The Reformer where the chair of our board, David Major, has been interviewed, has done an excellent job, and has given us one voice. So none of the others of us have been quoted, and I think it's a very effective approach.
Okay, good. I would like to get a sense.
He's not here, so we can volunteer him.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Around
He's not here, let's
the
volunteer.
table.
Everyone in favor of that quick?
And I'm glad you're back, Ed, because what I'm trying to do is to get a sense from around the table as to whether the boards, which are litigants, would like to have a designated spokesperson to speak on behalf of the boards in matters that involve the litigation with the state board. And Cheryl Charles has noted that, at least in the case of Westminster, their chair, David Major, has spoken about the litigation on behalf of their board.
To speak for the Grafton board, there's only two of us here right now. Are you asking specifically whether we want to choose a spokesman for our board?
Let me suggest that the boards which are litigating, and at this point that would be Athens, Grafton, Westminster, and the Union High School, may see wisdom in having one spokesman on behalf of all four boards, or it may be a situation where the boards themselves may want to designate a spokesman for the board. And if that's the way we go, it would seem to me to be very important that those spokespeople stay in close contact so that the messaging is consistent.
I would personally support that each board has their own spokesperson. While we have a lawsuit, we are all part of the same lawsuit. We all have varying reasons for being in that lawsuit, and I would not like to cede to another town to speak for what we consider important. And so I would be in support of saying if there's a need for a spokesperson and there's an issue regarding Westminster, or the press wishes to speak to Westminster, then they should speak to someone from Westminster. If they wish to speak to someone from Grafton, they should speak to someone from Grafton, or Athens, or the high school.
Let's ask Athens. Harold, is there any prevailing sentiment with your board?
I suspect that we would agree with Ed on this, that because our reasons for being in this lawsuit may be different than Westminster's reasons or somebody else's, and therefore, if the Reformer or somebody calls us, then I think we'd like to have our own voice.
From the table, and once again, it's a question to all members sitting at the table, not just the SU reps. Is there any objection in proceeding that way, or even any comments, Stephen?
I can certainly sympathize with that. Although this is a joint lawsuit with other towns as well, and if there are too many opinions or too many spokespeople, I guess, presented with too many ideas, then it runs the risk of muddying the lawsuit, not making it a clear challenge on specific points against the forced merger process. There would be a point in having not just a spokesperson for our district, but a spokesperson more broadly for all these towns that are opposed to the lawsuit, but even just consolidating within our district and getting our ideas all to one person, so that when the reformer from the Rutland Herald calls, they only have so much time. They'll call one person, get the information, and that spokesperson could present the ideas from each town. That's just a thought. Otherwise, I mean, it can go either way.
Because I do know that even though they talked with David Major, for example, the reformer had called me, and asked me just a couple of very, very simple, very brief questions, and that was it. I did tell them that I wasn't in a position to give them any definitive answers, because I did not want to risk not telling, what needed to be told. So
I'm going to ask if this is a situation, and Ed, you might have some experience with this. If this is a situation where perhaps the executive committee of the supervisory union board, and the executive committee by definition are the constituent board chairs or their designees, could assume responsibility for messaging on behalf of the litigants, and presumably the executive committee would then be the conduit for dissemination of information, and if the executive committee deemed it necessary, could appoint a spokesman or even rotate the position of being a spokesman. In other words, the boards therefore would then control their messaging, but the messaging would be tightly coordinated between those board chairs or designee.
We could form a committee of the board chairs, but it could not be this executive committee of the SU, because this is not an SU matter. It's an individual town matter. So if the individual boards said, yes, we'd like to appoint our board chair to sit on a committee which would be separate from anything else, separate from the joint board, separate from everything else, that would be, deal with issues across then I think that would be fine to do.
Ed, I'm sensing emotion here, and I believe under the circumstances it's appropriate for this motion to arise at the SU table, because it's the one board which speaks on behalf of all the boards. So can we have a motion, please, Ed?
No, because I really don't think it's a motion for the SU to take up, David. I think it would actually be, quite frankly, it would be each of the individual boards would go, hey, we'd like you, Jessa, or you, Harold, or you, Stephen, to get together to talk for each of us.
We're not just at the SU table, we're at the joint board table.
But still, the joint board is not. I know I'm being really cutting a fine line here, but I really want this distinction to be made, because each of the towns is acting individually, okay? And until such time as we're forced to do anything other than act individual, we act as individuals on our own behalf, which is why each of us had to sign up for, if we wanted to partake in the particular lawsuit, as the individual towns. So therefore, if each of the individual towns said, hey, cool, we want to have these 4 people meet to talk and work together as intermediaries between our towns, it's separate from the joint board, and it is separate from the SU.
This is almost a conundrum, isn't it? We want to merge together to form a committee to
Well,
speak
I was going
against
to say,
the merger.
if we,
It's true.
it could be done as joint
As we all
boards
agree.
in that we're delegating. If we had chosen an outside public relations firm that we're all going to split the cost on, but instead we're actually just choosing a committee of 4. I think it can be done as a joint board motion, but because we can't vote on anything.
Since we are all individual boards that have opened our meetings, can we then go through each individual board and vote at this point to see if the individual boards want to participate in this type of a committee?
Do all of the joint boards still have quorum?
Well, yeah, our board doesn't have a quorum, plus It's not a warrant action.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's on here as new business for discussion, action, select
Okay, all right.
spokesperson.
Select
select
it could be.
But can I also, but I need to add that David Major and Dave Clark and myself and so forth, we have kept in communication.
Good.
You know, during this time. So it's not like we are individually talking, you know, because we have stayed in communication. I've had several emails, for example, from David Major and from David Clark and so forth, that we have worked together. So it's not like we're, you know, I'm just going to jump out on a limb and say, well, this is what the Athens board, you know, we have done that as a collective body.
Given that Grafton now is quorum challenged, and I believe the high school is also quorum challenged at this point. Help me with the count, Steve. I'm counting 3. Am I missing anyone? And we would
Jack
need
is
at
gone.
least
Jack is
6.
gone.
Jack is gone.
Okay. Then perhaps the boards can take it back to their individual bodies for discussion, unless the boards that have quorum would like to solve the matter now. I think that Ed's comments are, in my judgment, as an individual, and not as a board chair, but as an individual, I think Ed's comments are make a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, I would say, why don't we just, everybody put it on their own agendas?
Yeah, put on the agendas for next time, and
Yeah.
we'll do it.
Chris?
Yep, so,
Okay, well, we've worked through item 4. Item 5, old business, merger discussion and update. Is there anything?
Didn't have to be beat to death tonight.
Yes, sir.
And just backing up a little, apologize, after thinking about it, I did, when I was up in Montpelier on Monday, I was asked by Nicole Mace to whether or not Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union is officially pulling out of the Vermont School Board Association, and whatever you all decide, an official letter needs to be sent.
It's the
to
chair's
that.
opinion, Chris, that Nicole should write us a letter and ask the question. And then we could respond to her letter. I
think that's a good idea.
Don.
I may have missed this in the first hour of the meeting, but I would urge all the boards to get this court action enacted as soon as possible. As they reading the articles of agreement that have been forced upon us by the state board, we have no fewer than 30 days to warn an organizational meeting for
It's
already been done.
The meeting's been warned.
That's been done.
And the meeting has been warned, and all of the boards have engaged, joined the engagement suit.
Okay, so we're
good to go.
we're working in accordance with these with this forced articles of agreement then.
Well, only if that
I'm sorry?
meeting happens and has a quorum.
Yes.
And it's
Well, if
but-
we don't get on the stick with, to me, having a stay on the execution of
We're all involved in the lawsuit. Each of us. We
the
already.
lawsuit it's filed in court.
It
right
will
now.
be.
It will be.
Tomorrow, the next day.
Yeah, actually, somebody tell us all what's, you seem to know a bit about it. Update us.
I have no knowledge of how the.
You said it might be filed soon.
It was my understanding
Carolyn
that.
said-
Okay, yeah.
Carolyn said that to me.
What I can tell you, Stephen, definitively, is that Dave Kelly got in touch with me last week, asked me to cut a check for $295 to the Order of Superior Court, and indicated that the suit would be filed late this week. And I have not heard anything to the contrary.
And the suit is seeking an injunction.
I do not actually know what the specific language of the suit is, and it's and it's possible that the boards which are involved in litigation have more information about the specifics, but I do know that the intent
We haven't been told.
was not to tip the board's hands until such time as the suit was filed. So if there's, anyone who's been a party to the discussions with Dave Kelly who can brief you confidentially, I think that's entirely fine. I can't tell you because I don't know. My presumption is that it would be, it would begin with a request for a stay or an injunction, or what do lawyers do in these situations, Kristen? I don't know.
I am not a litigator.
Rick.
So I would just like to clarify, because you've said it a couple times tonight, that Dave Kelly contacted you and asked you for a check, and that is in your role as
that is in my role as the executive director of the Alliance of Vermont School Board Members. We're a 501c3.
Yes.
We hold the checkbook for the
correct.
litigation.
And I brought up my desire for clarification in that role in our public meetings. I think in the future when you're making a statement like that they contacted you, that if you could be clear that Dave Kelly contacted me in my role as this, so that it's differentiated from your role as the WNESU chair.
That's a very important distinction, and thank you for pointing it out.
Not just for us, but for people
For the
watching at
camera.
home. And, I think most of us know that, but just to make it clear in the notes, and if Josh could actually make that in the notes, if he noted that anywhere that Dave Kelly had asked you that, and if I would like it if I'll try to remember that when we're approving the minutes next time to make sure that is noted. Maybe I'm being a little fussy about this, but
right. Excellent point. Don.
Well, to continue my thought, Mr. Chairman, I'm just concerned that the state has forced a very tight timeline on the 3 districts, and there are 6 individuals that are specified as members of this transitional board, and I'm concerned about the liability on these 6 individuals if we don't have a legal stay of execution on this forced merger. So my interest in making sure the litigation's been filed as properly.
The only thing you can guarantee with a lawsuit or any other action that ends up in the courts is that you cannot guarantee an outcome. What I can also tell you, if you're not already aware of it, Stowe, Elmore, Morrisville hired the law firm of Downs, Racklin, and Martin, which did file suit last week, and the 50 pages of that suit are an attachment to the story that ran last week in Vermont Digger, which is still up on the website if you go down to the bottom where they list the ed articles. And once again, I'm not a lawyer, but I would imagine that a stay for Stowe would tend to indicate what a possibly likely outcome would be on the suit that will be filed on behalf of the litigant boards here. Harold.
If I could maybe help Don in this without giving any information, because it was during our executive session of a meeting that we had. Both the Athens and the Grafton boards had a plan and said what we would do during that. So just be aware that we are aware and we have a plan in place to act appropriately at that point in time. So just, I can't go any further than that because it was in executive session.
Anyone else? We're discussing merger update. Okay, I guess we've gone through that topic. Director's comments. Rick, why don't you start us off if you...
It was fun having a vote we didn't all agree on. I appreciated that.
I have some comments.
Cheryl?
I think around the topic of spokesperson and the potential suit, I just really want to reinforce that I'm sure that we'll all keep talking with one another.
Yep.
And I, as ever, am grateful for this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Tim? Brenda?
Nothing.
Stephen? Kristen? Margot? Rick?
I'm kind of actually enjoying these joint meetings, and I think that we've been getting some good dialogue and showing that we are a collaborative and somewhat merged organization and group. As the Rockingham School Board Chair, I'd like to say to all the world out there that election time is coming up faster than everyone may think. Petitions can be drawn now and need to be in by January 28th or 29th, and there are 4 open seats on the Rockingham School Board this year. Kristen? You're the only one that's not up for debate. I think maybe other boards may want to be aware of that, remind that too. I don't know if everyone has the same difficulty we have in filling seats, but I've been spending more time than I would like lately dwelling on how we're going to make sure that our seats are filled, and for all the people who have issues with how the system works and is run, now's your chance.
Thanks, Rick. That's quite a statement.
Yeah.
It is important.
Yeah.
Ed?
I'm good.
Yes, sir.
Harold? I'm just happy with the transparency that the other chairs of the boards have shared with each other during this time. And I'm looking forward to it to stay open and share from each other and win the victory.
Lynn? Charles? Bob?
All set.
Your board has lost quorum. Did we adjourn the locals first, Ed, or did we adjourn the SU board first?
We never called the SU board to order, technically.
Did you call the
I
SU
think he
board?
did.
Yeah,
We did, because we were running late. I think you have to do it in the reverse order that you.
Yeah, so probably the SU board.
I called the SU board and then went around the table. I wrote that local
Yeah,
board
so I
call.
think.
Just adjourn.
Well, okay, SU board is adjourned.
Yeah, I went.
Athens board's adjourned.
Rockingham board's adjourned.
I need this one finalized.
See you, Steve.
January 7th.
Then it says